I remember the sting of that night as if it's burned into my skin. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the glow of chandeliers overhead. It should have been a celebration, but for me it was nothing less than a spectacle of humiliation. My cousin Melissa's engagement party had drawn nearly the entire family into one gilded ballroom, tables draped in white linen, roses in crystal vases, waiters gliding across polished marble floors with trays of champagne. It was the kind of scene that made our family look perfect to outsiders. But behind the smiling photographs and expensive gowns, cruelty lived. And that night, it found its stage in me. I had tried to blend into the background, a shadow among sequins and silk. My dress was modest, simple, a navy blue piece I'd worn to work functions before. I couldn't afford to buy something new, not with the bills piling up and the rent due. But when I walked in, I caught the glance of my Aunt Patricia, her eyes scanning me up and down as if she were evaluating a piece of worn out furniture someone had dragged in from the curb. Look who finally decided to show up, she said loudly enough for the group of relatives around her to hear. Elena, dear, we weren't sure you'd come. I mean, do you even own anything appropriate for an occasion like this? The group laughed. My cheeks burned, but I forced a tight smile. Good evening, Aunt Patricia. Congratulations to Melissa. But the smile only seemed to invite more knives. Melissa herself, glowing in her silver gown, leaned forward with a smirk. It's okay, Auntie. Elena's style is understated. Maybe one day she'll splurge on something other than clearance racks. The laughter grew louder, echoing off the ballroom walls. I felt every eye on me, even those who weren't part of the circle. Some looked away quickly, uncomfortable, while others leaned in, hungry for more of my humiliation. I clenched my hands at my sides, nails digging into my palms. My inner voice screamed at me to walk away, but my legs felt rooted, heavy, betrayed by my own body. Don't be so harsh, Melissa, my Uncle Charles added, swirling his whiskey. Elena is just practical. Why waste money on dresses when you have no one to impress? His words twisted like a blade. The implication was clear: I was single, undesirable, and destined to remain so. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay even. I'm happy for you, Melissa. You look beautiful tonight. But Melissa wasn't done. She tilted her head, the smirk never fading. Thank you, Elena. Maybe one day you'll find someone too. Though at your age, the options might be running out. The laughter that followed wasn't just cruel, it was deafening. It filled every corner of the room, drowning out the music, the clinking glasses, even the beating of my heart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hurl the glass of water in my hand at her flawless, smirking face. But instead, I stood frozen, my throat tight, my eyes burning with unshed tears. Inside, my thoughts spiraled. How dare they reduce me to a punchline, a sideshow, after everything I had sacrificed for this family? Did they even remember the nights I spent in hospital corridors with my mother while they enjoyed vacations in Europe? Did they remember how I worked two jobs just to keep food on the table when my father left? Of course not. To them, I was invisible until I could be useful or humiliated. I forced myself to breathe. One, two, three. I would not cry here, not in front of them. But fate was not kind as I tried to slip away toward the buffet. My cousin Daniel, always eager to earn a laugh at my expense, blocked my path. Hey, Alina, he called out, raising his glass. Remember when you said you were going to start your own business? What happened with that? Oh, right. You're still slaving away at that tiny desk job, aren't you? The circle erupted again. I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood. I'm doing fine. But Daniel wouldn't let go. Fine. That's what losers say when they don't want to admit they failed. Don't worry, Elena. Not everyone can be successful like the rest of us. My Aunt Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Oh, don't tease her too much, Daniel. It's not Elena's fault. She never lived up to her potential. Some people just don't have it in them. And that was when the final blow landed. Melissa's fiancé, who barely knew me, leaned into the circle and whispered something that made Melissa laugh so hard she nearly spilled her champagne. Then she turned to me, her eyes gleaming with malicious delight. You know what, Alina? Why don't you give a toast? Your family, too, after all. Stand up and tell everyone how happy you are for us. Unless, of course, it's too painful for you to pretend. The words hit me like a slap. A toast. After they had dragged me through the dirt, mocked my clothes, my career, my very existence. The room had gone quiet, waiting, eager. I felt the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on me. My throat tightened, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might actually collapse. But then something inside me shifted. I raised my glass slowly, my hand trembling but steady enough to keep the water from spilling. My voice came out soft, almost fragile at first, but each word carried the steel I was beginning to feel rise inside me. To Melissa and Jason, I said, my eyes locked on her smirking face. May your life together be as perfect as you want everyone to believe it is. The room laughed again, but this time there was a strange edge to it. Some caught the subtle venom in my words, though Melissa only smirked wider. I lowered my glass, set it down on the nearest table, and walked away before anyone could say another word. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step carrying me farther from their laughter, but the sounds still echoed in my head, drilling into my skull like a relentless reminder of my place in their hierarchy. I didn't stop until I reached the bathroom. The door clicked shut behind me, and I collapsed against the counter, my breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Tears spilled over, hot and furious. I gripped the sink, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face was flushed, my mascara smudged, my eyes swollen with rage and shame. How dare they? I whispered to myself. How dare they treat me like this? I replayed every word, every laugh, every glance of pity disguised as amusement, and with each replay, my shame began to harden into something else, something sharper. I thought of my mother, of the sacrifices I had made, of the years I had given up to hold this family together when they would have let it fall apart. I thought of every time I had swallowed my pride, every time I had bitten my tongue, every time I had chosen silence over confrontation. And then I thought of Melissa's smirk, Patricia's sneer, Daniel's mockery. A cold calm began to spread through me, pushing back the tears. My breathing slowed, my shoulders straightened. No more, I whispered. I didn't know what form it would take yet. I didn't know how or when. But in that bathroom, staring at my reflection, I made a vow. They would regret this. I would not be their punchline, their scapegoat, their forgotten shadow. I would be the storm they never saw coming. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, the laughter had moved on to some other target, some other joke. I slipped past them unnoticed, just as they had always treated me. But inside, something had changed. The silence they mocked in me would become my greatest weapon. And that night, as the chandeliers glowed and the champagne flowed, I smiled for the first time, not out of joy, but out of the secret knowledge that their reign of cruelty was numbered. Because I had finally decided enough was enough. And though they didn't know it yet, that was the night the revenge began. When people look at families from the outside, they often imagine warmth, Sunday dinners, laughter around the table, a sense of belonging. That was never my reality. My family wore the mask of perfection, but behind closed doors, we were a battlefield where only the loudest, the wealthiest, and the cruelest survived. From as early as I can remember, I was the outsider in my own home. My brother, Adrian, was the golden child. Everything he touched turned to applause. When he scored a goal at his soccer game, the family showered him with praise, cheering as if he'd won a championship. When I brought home a drawing from school, my mother barely looked up from her magazine. That's nice, Elena, she'd say without lifting her eyes. Go put it on the fridge. And so the fridge became a graveyard of forgotten attempts at recognition. It wasn't that I didn't try. I tried harder than anyone. I studied late into the night, memorizing every page of my textbooks, desperate for approval. When report cards came home, mine were filled with A's and commendations from teachers. Adrian's were spotted with C's, but my parents still celebrated him. Adrian's just more well-rounded, my father would say, patting him on the back. Grades aren't everything. He's got charisma. Leadership. Alina could learn from that. I'd sit quietly at the table, my straight A's ignored like dust on the floor. By the time I reached high school, I had learned my role, the responsible one, the background character. My parents leaned on me when bills needed to be sorted, when groceries had to be carried in, when chores piled up. Adrian was excused. He needs to focus on his sports, they'd explain. But the truth was harsher. He was their pride and I was their utility. The extended family only reinforced this imbalance. At gatherings, Adrian was introduced with pride. This is Adrian. He's going to be a lawyer one day. For me, it was, and this is Alina. She helps out a lot around the house. That word, helps, became my entire identity. I wasn't brilliant or ambitious or promising. I was helpful. Invisible labor wrapped in a polite smile. The years passed and the pattern only deepened. When my father walked out one spring, leaving us with nothing but debt and excuses, it was me, not Adrian, who stepped into the gap. My mother collapsed into depression, retreating to her room for weeks at a time. Adrian shrugged, too busy chasing girls and late night parties. So I worked. I picked up shifts at the local cafe before school and cleaned offices after. I stretched every dollar, every meal, every ounce of energy I had. I became the glue that held the household together, and still no one thanked me. If anything, they resented me for it. My mother would wake from her days long enough to criticize. You should smile more, Alina. You always look so serious. No wonder people don't like you. Adrian, hungover and smug, would smirk. Lighten up, Elena. Life isn't that hard. Life wasn't hard for him because I carried the weight of it on my shoulders. By the time I was 21, exhaustion had become my second skin. The college had been a dream I gave up willingly when mom's health took a turn. I stayed close, working full time, keeping the house running while Adrian went away to university. Every time a relative asked about my plans, the comparison stabbed me anew. Oh, Adrian is thriving in college. He's already lined up an internship. Aunt Patricia would gush at family dinners. Then she'd turn to me with a thin smile. And what about you, Alina? Still helping out at home. Still helping, always helping. The years blurred. My 20s slipped away in a haze of double shifts, medical appointments, and late night cries from my mother's room. I gave everything I had, even as my own dreams shriveled into dust. Relationships never lasted. Who had time for romance when you were too tired to stay awake past 10? Friends drifted away, tired of my excuses. I was alone, always alone. But what hurt most wasn't the sacrifice, it was the mockery. My family didn't see me as selfless. They saw me as pathetic. At gatherings, I was the easy target. When cousins got engaged, I was teased about my singleness. When someone bought a new car, my modest little sedan became the punchline. They laughed at my clothes, my job, my lack of a glamorous life. Daniel, especially, loved to needle me. Don't worry, Elena, he'd sneer across the dinner table. Some people are meant for greatness, and some people are meant to make greatness possible. Guess which one you are. The laughter would swell around me, each chuckle another reminder that I didn't belong, even in my own bloodline. But the cruelest chapter of my backstory came when my mother's health declined again in my late 20s. The cancer returned, spreading faster than before. I was her caretaker through it all. Hospital runs, sleepless nights, bills stacked higher than I could manage. Adrian visited once or twice, more for appearances than concern. The extended family offered condolences, but no real help. When she passed, I thought foolishly that someone might finally recognize what I had done. That maybe, just maybe, they'd thank me for carrying that burden alone. Instead, they turned her death into another weapon. At the funeral, Aunt Patricia clutched Adrian's arm, tears in her eyes. Poor Adrian, she sighed. He's lost his mother so young. It must be so hard for him. I stood nearby, holding the program, invisible as ever. Don't forget Alina, another aunt whispered. Patricia's lips tightened. Elena. Oh, she'll manage, she always does. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the words from her throat and force her to see me. But instead, I swallowed my grief, buried it beneath layers of silence. After my mother's passing, I inherited nothing but her debts. Adrian and the others made sure of that. I later learned that paperwork had been altered. Signatures forged to ensure her modest savings flowed directly to Adrian. When I questioned it, Patricia snapped, "Don't be ungrateful, Elena. Money won't bring your mother back. Besides, Adrian needs it more than you do. You'll be fine." Fine. Always fine. I remember lying awake at night in the small apartment I managed to keep afloat, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I could keep surviving like this. My life felt like a string stretched to its limit, fraying at the edges, ready to snap. And through it all, I told myself stories. Stories of what it would feel like if they respected me, if they saw me, if they treated me like more than the family's scapegoat. But those were fantasies. Reality was harsher. Reality was Daniel's sneers, Patricia's dismissive sighs, Melissa's mocking smirks. Reality was Adrian squandering the inheritance I had earned through sacrifice while I scraped by. Reality was silence. And yet, even in that silence, a seed was growing. Looking back now, I realized that the years of humiliation weren't wasted, they were fuel. Every insult, every slight, every laugh at my expense was stored away, piece by piece, in the deepest part of me. I didn't know it then, but I was building an arsenal. I was learning patience. I was learning how to observe, how to endure, how to wait. And waiting, I would later discover, was the sharpest weapon of all. Because patience turns pain into strategy, and silence, when it finally breaks, is louder than any laugh. By the time I entered my 30s, I was a ghost to them. Present, but unseen. Always the helper, always the background. They thought they had me figured out. a harmless shadow too weak to fight back, too broken to matter. And perhaps for a time they were right. I had buried myself so deep in duty and survival that I almost forgot I had teeth. Almost. Because beneath the layers of exhaustion, beneath the years of mockery, there was still a spark. A spark I didn't even recognize until the night of Melissa's engagement party. That night, when their laughter filled the room and my humiliation reached its peak, the spark caught flame, and the woman they had dismissed, mocked, and erased was finally waking up. If I thought Melissa's engagement party was the peak of my humiliation, I was wrong. That night was only a spark, and the fire that followed spread further and faster than I could have imagined. The weeks after the party were quiet on the surface, but I could feel something shifting beneath it. The phone calls from my relatives grew colder, shorter. Invitations to gatherings dwindled until they disappeared completely. And when I did bump into one of them, the conversation was sharp with condescension, as if they'd all silently agreed that I was unworthy of respect. The gossip reached me in whispers, always through someone else, an old neighbor, a distant cousin who felt sorry for me. They say you're bitter. Elena, one told me, that you've let yourself go, that you're jealous of Melissa. A jealous. That was the word they loved most. They wielded it like a blade, slicing away any claim I might have to dignity. She's just jealous, Patricia would say when someone asked why I wasn't around as much. She can't stand to see others happy because her own life is, well, I knew. I always knew. It wasn't enough for them to ignore me. They had to poison how others saw me too. The escalation began small. A cousin's wedding came and went, and I learned about it only after seeing the photos online. Everyone dressed in lavender gowns and crisp tuxedos, smiling under flower-draped arches. Everyone but me. I texted Adrian asking why I hadn't been invited. His reply came hours later, dripping with disdain. It was a small wedding. They only wanted close family, a close family. As if I wasn't blood, as if decades of sacrifice hadn't bound me tighter to them than any of their fair weather friends. I wanted to scream, but instead I deleted the message and sat in silence. Always silence, but silence didn't stop the next blow. One spring afternoon, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. At first, I thought it was another bill, another demand I couldn't afford to meet. But when I opened it, my hands trembled. It was from a lawyer. The letter explained, in cold official language, that my mother's modest house, the one I had grown up in, the one I had poured years of sweat and sacrifice into maintaining, was being formally transferred to Adrian. Not sold, not shared. Transferred as though it had always been his and I was merely a squatter passing through. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. My chest tightened, my breath caught. I could still remember scrubbing those floors until my knees ached, patching leaky roofs, stretching grocery money to keep the lights on. I had kept that house alive, and now it was being ripped away from me with a signature. I confronted Adrian that evening. I drove to his apartment, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my stomach in knots. When he opened the door, his expression was annoyed, as if I'd interrupted something important. What do you want? He asked flatly. I held up the letter with trembling hands. What is this? Why are they transferring Mom's house to you? She never would have agreed to this. Adrian smirked, leaning casually against the doorframe. Oh, come on, Alina. Don't act surprised. Everyone knew the house would come to me eventually. You don't need it. You've got your little apartment. My little apartment. My voice cracked with disbelief. That house was my life. Adrian. Hicker, I took care of her. You barely even showed up when she was sick. His smirk grew crueler. You think that matters. Nobody asked you to play martyr. You chose that life. And don't blame me because you wasted your 20s wiping Mom's tears while the rest of us moved on. The words hit harder than any slap. My eyes burned with hot tears, but I refused to let them fall. You forged something, I said, my voice low, dangerous. You had to. Mom wouldn't have done this. Not to me. Adrian's eyes flickered, just for a moment before his grin returned. Prove it. And with that, he slammed the door in my face. I stood there in the dim hallway, shaking, humiliated, my fists clenched at my sides. Prove it, the words rang in my ears. He knew I couldn't. He knew I didn't have the money for lawyers, the influence to fight him, the strength to take on the family united against me. Because they were united. The following weeks confirmed what I already suspected. At a rare gathering I forced myself to attend, Aunt Patricia made a show of discussing the house as though I were invisible. It's such a relief that Adrian got the house, she said, sipping her wine. At least it's staying in capable hands. Elena could never manage a property like that. Melissa laughed. Please, Auntie. Elena can barely manage herself. Imagine her trying to keep up with a mortgage or renovations. It would fall apart in months. The table chuckled. My face burned, but I said nothing. I sat there picking at my food, swallowing every bitter word I wanted to unleash. Daniel leaned across the table, grinning like a predator. Hey, Elena, maybe you could rent a room from Adrian. I'm sure he'd give you a family discount. The laughter roared. I excused myself and fled to the bathroom, the same scene replaying itself again and again. Always me, always humiliated, always retreating to cry in silence where no one could see. But this time, something different brewed beneath the tears. Because beneath the despair, a new voice whispered, they're taking everything, and they won't stop until you have nothing left. And the voice was right. It didn't end with the house. Later that year, my grandmother passed away. She had been the last tether I felt to any sort of kindness in the family. She was quiet, gentle, the only one who ever told me she was proud of me, even if her voice was frail and fading. I thought maybe, just maybe, she had left something for me. Not money necessarily, but perhaps a keepsake, a token, some acknowledgement that I mattered to her. But when the will was read, my name was absent, completely absent. Melissa inherited jewelry. Daniel got a share of savings bonds. Adrian received land. Even Patricia walked away with family heirlooms. Me. Nothing, not a trinket, not a mention. It was as if I didn't exist. Afterward, in the parking lot, I overheard Patricia's voice cutting through the cold evening air. Well, it makes sense. Alina doesn't need anything. She never does. She's just fine. Fine, that cursed word again. I went home that night and sat in the dark, staring at my empty walls. The silence was heavy, suffocating. For hours, I couldn't move, couldn't think. But then, slowly, my thoughts sharpened. Every slight, every insult, every theft replayed in my mind like a reel. And I realized something. They weren't just cruel. They weren't just dismissive. They were predators. And predators didn't stop until they had devoured everything. I had been their prey for years, meek, quiet, easy to dismiss. But prey can only be cornered so many times before it bares its teeth. The escalation was complete. They had taken my dignity, my inheritance, my place in the family. But they had also given me something in return. They had given me rage, and rage, when fed by patience, becomes something else entirely. It becomes strategy. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the silence was no longer suffocating. It was alive, pulsing, whispering promises of what was to come. I didn't know how yet, I didn't know when, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: they had gone too far, and soon they would pay. They say people don't change, that the quiet ones stay quiet, that the weak remain weak, that the ones used to bowing their heads will never learn to lift their chins. But that's a lie, because silence isn't always weakness, it's observation. And weakness isn't permanent, it's preparation. The night after my grandmother's will was read, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, replaying every humiliation, every stolen opportunity, every smirk and laugh and sneer. My chest ached with the weight of it, but for the first time in years, I didn't cry. Instead, I thought, and thinking turned into something sharper, something harder. A plan wasn't born that night, not fully formed, but a seed was planted, and once that seed took root, there was no stopping its growth. The first step was clarity. I pulled out a notebook I hadn't touched in years, one of those cheap spiral bound ones I used to jot recipes in. I flipped past the faded ink and scribbled pages until I found a clean sheet. At the top, I wrote one word in bold letters, or VNG. The sight of it on paper sent a shiver down my spine. For years, revenge had felt like a dirty word, something petty beneath me, but now it looked wholly sacred, like a promise. Below it, I wrote their names one by one: Adrian, Melissa, Daniel, Patricia. Each name was a wound, each name blood ink across the page. Then, under each name, I began listing their weaknesses. Adrian was cocky, reckless, careless with money. He thrived on control, but he was sloppy when he thought no one was watching. Melissa craved approval, especially from strangers. She lived for appearances, for the glittering surface. Scratch beneath that, and she was insecure, fragile, desperate. Daniel loved to gamble, literally and metaphorically. He thought himself clever, invincible, but his debts whispered otherwise. He was arrogant, but arrogance blinds. And Patricia was the linchpin, the matriarch, the spider weaving the web. Her weakness, vanity. She needed to be respected, feared, obeyed. Undermine that, and her web would collapse. I stared at the page, my pulse quickening. For the first time, I felt something other than despair. I felt control. The second step was patience. Revenge isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. I knew if I lunged too quickly, they'd see me coming, and predators only respect the prey that outsmarts them. So I smiled. I forced myself to attend family gatherings again. I forced myself to laugh at their jokes, to sit quietly while they mocked me, to nod when they dismissed me. I became invisible again, but this time by choice. They thought they had broken me completely. That was my advantage, because when no one is watching you, you're free to watch them. It was at Adrian's housewarming party that my real opportunity first revealed itself. The house, my mother's house, looked different, repainted in garish grays and filled with cheap modern furniture. But the bones were the same, and walking through it felt like wandering through a desecrated temple. I kept my face neutral, smiling faintly as I accepted a glass of wine, but inside I burned. Adrian was bragging loudly to a group of coworkers, his arms slung around Melissa's shoulders as though she were his trophy instead of his cousin. "This place is just the start," he said, puffing out his chest. "I'm investing in 2 more properties by the end of the year. Real estate is where the real money is." The coworkers nodded politely, but I caught the flicker in one man's eyes, a flicker of skepticism. Interesting. Later that night, while Adrian got drunk and loud, I slipped quietly into his study. It was the same room that once held my mother's books, the shelves now stripped bare and lined with cheap decor. On his desk, a laptop glowed faintly. Next to it, a pile of bills sat half open. I couldn't resist. Flipping through them, I saw exactly what I expected: overdue notices, credit card statements, and mortgage documents that told a story far different from the one he bragged about. Adrian wasn't building an empire. He was sinking. I smiled, sliding one of the envelopes back into place. The seed of his downfall was already planted. He just didn't know it yet. Melissa was next. She was busy planning her wedding, and I made myself available to help. I offered to run errands, to taste cakes, to sit through endless fittings. She took the bait eagerly. What she didn't realize was that I was watching, listening. Melissa's obsession with perfection left cracks everywhere. She was drowning in expenses, desperate for sponsorships, desperate for validation. Her social media was a curated fantasy, one that consumed her every waking thought. All I had to do was find the right string to pull, and her fantasy would unravel in front of everyone. And Daniel, he made it easy. One night, after too many drinks, he cornered me in the kitchen during a family dinner. You know, he slurred, leaning too close. "You'd be a lot prettier if you smiled more. Why are you always so angry?" I held back the urge to slap him and instead tilted my head sweetly. "Maybe I just need someone to cheer me up, like you, Daniel. You always know how to have fun, don't you?" His chest puffed, pride swelling. "That's right. Nobody parties like me." And just like that, he began to brag about his poker games, about the bets he placed, about how he was this close to a big win. But I caught the truth between his words. He was bleeding money. He was desperate. Another weakness, another opening. Patricia took longer. She was sharp, careful, harder to read. But even she had her blind spots. One Sunday afternoon, I visited her under the guise of reconnecting. She welcomed me with her usual air of superiority, sitting in her pristine living room like a queen on her throne. As she droned on about church gossip and neighborhood politics, I noticed the stack of mail on her side table. On top, a glossy brochure caught my eye: Local Community Women's Award Gala honoring leaders of influence. I tucked the observation away, smiling politely as she continued. Patricia lived for recognition. If someone threatened her standing, her respectability, her image, she would crumble. And I already knew exactly how to make that happen. By the end of that year, my notebook was full. Pages upon pages of notes, observations, plans, timelines, risks, rewards. Every word they had thrown at me, every slight, every humiliation I had turned into strategy. I was no longer the Alina who cried in bathrooms and walked away in silence. I was no longer prey. I was a hunter. And hunters know one truth above all: you don't strike until the prey is exactly where you want it. So I waited. And I watched. And slowly, very slowly, I began to build the cage they would never escape. The first strike was Adrian. He had always been the loudest, the most arrogant, the one who loved to parade his so-called success in front of anyone who would listen, which meant the sweetest way to ruin him was in front of everyone he wanted to impress. His company was hosting a grand investor night, a flashy event where he planned to pitch new property projects. He invited family too, of course. He loved nothing more than parading us around like proof of his roots. "Make sure you dress nice, Elena," he said smugly over the phone. "This is a big deal. I'll let you bask in the glow of what success really looks like." I thanked him sweetly, biting back the laughter in my throat, because what Adrian didn't know was that I had already spoken with one of his supposed investors. Through a friend of a friend, I'd managed to get a copy of the presentation Adrian was planning to deliver, and I knew down to the last figure that his numbers were lies, debt disguised as profit, loans disguised as assets. He was building a castle on sand, and I was about to kick the foundation. The night of the event, I dressed in black, not flashy, not loud, just elegant, understated, like the calm before a storm. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and expensive suits. Adrian strutted around like a peacock, slapping backs, flashing smiles, oozing confidence. Melissa clung to his arm like an accessory, her sequin dress catching the light. When he spotted me, he smirked. Well, well, look who finally showed up looking presentable. I smiled faintly. Wouldn't miss it. He laughed, already dismissing me, and turned to his guests. The presentation began. Adrian clicked through slides of glossy properties, projected profits, grand promises. The crowd murmured with interest, some nodding, others skeptical but polite. And then, my moment. From the back of the room, a man in a crisp gray suit stood. One of the investors. He cleared his throat. Adrian, forgive me, he said, his voice sharp. But these numbers don't match the financial documents we've been provided. In fact, they seem to contradict them entirely. A hush fell over the room. Adrian froze, his confident grin slipping for the first time. What are you talking about? He stammered. The man lifted a folder. Your debt ratio alone makes these projections impossible. Care to gasps, murmurs. Heads turning, Adrian's face flushed crimson. He stumbled over words, trying to recover, but the room was no longer his. The investors smelled blood. Questions flew at him like daggers. And I sat there silent, watching his empire crumble in real time. When he finally stormed off the stage, sweat beading his forehead, his eyes landed on me. For a split second, something flickered there, recognition, a suspicion. But he didn't dare voice it. Not yet. Melissa was easier. Her obsession with appearances made her fragile. All I had to do was prick the bubble. Her wedding day was her kingdom come. She'd been planning it for 2 years, pouring every ounce of energy into making it perfect. The dress, the flowers, the venue. Nothing less than flawless would do. And yet perfection has a way of cracking under pressure. I'd quietly reached out to one of her vendors, the florist, a desperate young woman struggling to keep her business afloat, drowning in debts not unlike Daniel. I slipped her an envelope thick with cash and whispered a simple request. Don't deliver. The morning of the wedding, Melissa's screams echoed through the bridal suite. What do you mean the flowers aren't here? Do you know what I paid them? Do you know how this looks? Her bridesmaids fluttered around her, trying to soothe, but nothing worked. The venue staff scrambled, throwing together last-minute arrangements from whatever they could find. By the time Melissa walked down the aisle, her bouquet looked pitiful. Wilted roses, mismatched greenery. Nothing like the Instagram fantasy she'd promised her followers. And worse, I'd arranged for a few candid photos to leak online before the ceremony was even over. By the evening, her carefully curated social media empire was on fire. Comments poured in, mockery, disappointment, whispers that she wasn't the flawless queen she pretended to be. Melissa smiled tightly through it all, but her eyes darted to me more than once, suspicion flickering there. I only raised my glass and sipped. Daniel, though, needed a heavier hand. He was bleeding money through his gambling habit, and I only had to give him one final push. One night, I invited him out for drinks. He grinned, thinking himself the charming older cousin, and boasted as usual. Things are turning around, Elena, he said, slamming back his whiskey. One big win, and I'm back on top. That's how it works. I tilted my head. I heard the opposite. People say you've been losing. Badly? His face darkened. Who told you that? I shrugged. Just something I overheard. You know how people talk. The seed of paranoia took root instantly. His pride wouldn't allow anyone to think him a failure. Within weeks, he was playing recklessly, desperate to prove himself. I made sure to nudge him toward the wrong tables, the wrong people. Through quiet contacts, I arranged for his debts to be called in sooner, harsher. The night he was cornered by men he owed money to, I wasn't there, but I heard about it later, how they dragged him out of a bar, how his pleas echoed down the street. Daniel vanished from family gatherings after that, his swagger gone. Rumors spread, bankruptcy, threats, shame, and I sat at the table smiling politely, saying nothing, which left Patricia, the spider in the web, the queen of appearances. Her fall had to be spectacular. The opportunity came with the Community Women's Award Gala, the one she'd been boasting about for months. She was set to be honored as a pillar of influence, a paragon of integrity. But I had something she didn't know I had. Remember those documents I'd gathered, the whispers I'd followed? Buried in the records of Adrian's company were traces of Patricia's hand, her signature on falsified forms, her name tied to shell accounts. She wasn't just complicit in Adrian's lies, she had orchestrated them. The night of the gala, Patricia swept onto the stage in a glittering gown, her smile radiant under the lights. She accepted her award with a speech dripping with false humility. And then, just as the applause swelled, the screen behind her flickered. Images appeared, documents, signatures, bank records. Her voice faltered. The crowd gasped. Patricia Morales, the announcer's voice cut through the chaos, is currently under investigation for fraud and financial misconduct. Silence, stunned, horrified silence. Patricia's face went white. She spun, eyes wide, scanning the crowd. For a fraction of a second, her gaze met mine, and I smiled. The room erupted. Reporters shouting questions, guests whispering, phones flashing. Patricia's award slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor. Her empire of fear, of respect, of control. It shattered in an instant. One by one, they fell. Adrian, exposed as a fraud, drowning in debt. Melissa, her perfect image cracked, her marriage strained before it even began. Daniel, ruined, humiliated, indebted. Patricia, publicly disgraced, stripped of her power. And me? I stood in the ruins not as their victim, but as their reckoning. But revenge doesn't end with the strike. It lingers, it echoes. And as I watched them scatter, broken and desperate, I realized the story wasn't finished yet. Because revenge isn't just about what you take from them, it's about what you reclaim for yourself. And that part was still to come. Revenge doesn't taste like fire, it tastes like silence. That was the first thing I realized in the weeks after Patricia's fall. The house that had once roared with laughter at my expense, the family table that had echoed with mocking voices. It all grew quiet, and in that silence, I finally found peace. The morning after the gala scandal, my phone buzzed nonstop. News outlets wanted comments, old acquaintances wanted gossip, distant relatives wanted the real story. I ignored them all. Instead, I made myself coffee and sat by the window, watching the city come alive. The steam curled upward, warming my face. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the day ahead. Patricia had gone underground. Reports said she was cooperating with investigators, though I knew she'd fight tooth and nail to protect what scraps of dignity she thought she still had. Adrian's investors had pulled out en masse, and bankruptcy rumors swirled. Daniel had vanished completely, leaving behind whispers of threats and debts. And Melissa, poor, perfect Melissa, was still posting filtered photos as though nothing had happened, but the comments beneath them told the truth. They were unraveling, all of them. And I was free, but freedom is complicated. One evening, weeks later, I got a call from Adrian. His voice was raw, hoarse. "You did this, didn't you?" I sipped my tea, keeping my tone even. "Did what?" "Don't play dumb," he snapped. "The investors, the documents, the timing. You think I don't know? You think I don't see your fingerprints all over this?" I let the silence stretch. I wanted him to feel it, the weight of his own words, the desperation bleeding through. Finally, I said softly, "I thought you were too busy laughing at me to notice anything." He cursed, his anger breaking into ragged breath. Then a whisper, "Why, Elena? We're family." I laughed then, a bitter, hollow laugh that startled even me. "Family? Is that what you call what you did to me? To Mom? To everything she built?" He didn't answer, and for once, I didn't fill the silence for him. I hung up, the dial tone sharp and clean in my ear. Melissa was next. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, mascara smeared, her once perfect hair undone. "Elena," she pleaded, clutching my arm. "Please, you have to help me. People are destroying me online. They say I'm fake, a fraud. Sponsors are pulling out. I don't know what to do." I looked at her, really looked. The cousin who had laughed at my clothes, who had sneered at my choices, who had once whispered in my ear at Christmas, "You'll never be good enough, Elena." And now here she was, stripped bare. Begging, I took her hand gently, almost kindly. "Melissa, maybe this is your chance to be real, to stop pretending." Her eyes widened, glossy with tears. "You don't understand. I can't be nothing. I need them to love me." And in that moment, I saw it. Her prison. Different from mine, but just as suffocating. She wasn't free, and she might never be. I let her hand go. "Then I can't help you." She left sobbing, her heels clicking down the hallway like a retreating drumbeat. Daniel's reckoning came later. Rumors swirled. He'd been roughed up badly, that he owed money to people you don't cross. Then one night I found him outside my building, leaning against the wall, bruised and hollow-eyed. Elena, he croaked, please, I need money. Just until I get back on my feet. You know me, I always bounce back. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Bounce back, he looked like a man who had fallen off a cliff. Why me, Daniel? I asked. Why not Adrian? Or Melissa? Or Patricia? He lowered his gaze. Because you're the only one who might still care. For a flicker of a moment, pity stirred in me. Memories of childhood, of chasing fireflies in Grandma's yard, of laughing before life turned cruel. But then came the memory of him sneering at me across the dinner table, calling me pathetic, useless. The memory of his smirk when the will was read. I stepped closer, meeting his sunken eyes. I cared once. But you killed that, Daniel. You all did. He swallowed hard, nodding, as if he'd expected nothing less. He stumbled away into the night, and I never saw him again. And Patricia, her empire didn't collapse in one night. It crumbled slowly, piece by piece. Committees stripped her of titles, friends abandoned her, whispers followed her everywhere. But Patricia was stubborn. She still called me, her voice steady, defiant. You think you've won. Alina, she said once, her tone sharp as glass. But you've only destroyed this family. You'll regret it. I held the phone tighter, my jaw clenched. No, Patricia. I didn't destroy this family. You did. I only showed the world the truth. Her silence was thick, poisonous. For the first time, I imagined her sitting alone, her crown of influence gone, her throne empty. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Weeks turned into months. The noise died down. The scandals faded from headlines, though the scars remained. Adrian's company was gone. Patricia's name disgraced. Melissa's social media a graveyard of failed attempts. Daniel, a ghost. And me, I breathed. I started walking in the mornings, feeling the sun on my skin. I redecorated my small apartment, filling it with colors I loved instead of the muted tones I'd once chosen to avoid attention. I cooked meals that made me smile. I read books late into the night without guilt. Most importantly, I began to write. Not plans, not strategies, stories, my truths. For years I had been silent, my voice drowned out by the ones who mocked me. But now I wrote with fire, with clarity, with freedom. And in those words, I found myself again. One evening, sitting by the window, pen in hand, I thought about everything that had happened. Did revenge heal me? No, the scars remained. The memories still ached. But revenge gave me something else. Closure. Justice. A mirror held up to those who had laughed while I suffered. And maybe, in the end, that was enough. I whispered to the empty room, to the ghosts of my family. I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourselves. I only stopped letting you destroy me. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of peace. Full of strength. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of silence. I embraced it, because silence had been my prison, and now it was my freedom.